G'day folks, we're going to be talking today about the nodal axis and how I consider them to be relevant or useful within the context of esoteric astrology. I have been asked this question at least 5 or 6 times now. What is my view on the nodes? In evolutionary astrology, the North Node is often considered this point of development. The South Node is what we're coming in with, or something that's kind of a comfort zone. So we need to be moving towards that North Node. And there's an idea along with this about past karma, and the South Node really evoking something about the past life, and the North Node really revealing something about the soul's destiny. And this is partly why I get asked about the nodes, because in esoteric astrology, naturally we're speaking about the soul. However, when we speak of the soul and the soul purpose, we always refer to the rising sign with its esoteric ruler. So then how do the nodes fare? How do we reconcile these perspectives? Is one incorrect, or how might we take an esoteric delineation or understanding of the planets and what they do and kind of integrate the nodes as a part of that equation? Firstly, so we're on the same page, what are the nodes? They are not celestial bodies, but they are in fact mathematical points. They are the eclipse points where the sun and the moon have their meetings, and we have what we refer to as eclipse season or seasons in astrology that refer to that time period where the nodal axis will sit between two polar opposite signs. And that, off the top of my head, I may be wrong about this, I think it lasts for about 18 months or so, where the eclipse nodes, where the north and south node will sit between the polar opposite signs. So typically in standard astrology, when we're looking at the nodal axis and where the eclipses are taking place, there's often a motif of beginnings and endings occurring. So when we look at the natal chart or someone's specific horoscope, for instance, we would take note of where the two nodes are falling, and whatever the houses they are in the particular chart, there will be some kind of motif of that there. Let's say 4th and 10th house. Then there'll be something about home and career or vocation, and that might be moving home to start a new job or something like that, and that will correspond to where the eclipse take place, the moments when the eclipses happen, something like that. So that's just a reminder in terms of how we look at the nodes, just in terms of transits and things like that, and how they can be relevant and when we consider the fact of the eclipses. But let us go back further now and start bringing a context which can help us make the connection to the esoteric knowledge and wisdom. They are the lunar nodes, so we are in the domain necessarily of the moon. How do we interpret the moon in esoteric astrology? Yes, there are some crossovers with our standard or more orthodox interpretations. The subconscious, nurturing, sometimes the mother principle, can be the literal mother in some cases. What one needs to feel comfortable, these kinds of things, how we like to nurture or give nurturing to others, things of this nature. So that's all true. However, esoterically we understand or give a deeper context to the more general attribution of the subconscious. The moon rules all 3 bodies of the personality self, that is mental, emotional, physical. So the subconscious idea is really about the automated patterning and the construction of the personality itself. And it's different from the sun in that the sun is the basic vital emanation of the individuality. But we know esoterically that the moon is a dead planet. That is, it's not holding a strong energetic force, and rather it's a reflection of our past accumulated automated patterns that need to be, at least from the esoteric perspective, integrated, released, and need to be regenerated. This is why the moon falls in Scorpio. That is to say, the dead, outworn aspects of the personality, the automated self. This is why the moon is the prison of the soul in esoteric astrology, the construction of materiality in a way that inhibits the most authentic, true expression of the solar life. It falls in Scorpio, that is to say the personality, the outworn parts of it, die and are regenerated in Scorpio. And this is why the moon is attributed to the fourth ray, which in one of its expressions is this psychological turning over and regenerating of forms. So that is a big spiel on the moon, but it's important to do that because we're getting in the right esoteric context out of which we can start to colour our understanding of the nodes a little bit more from this esoteric standpoint. So then, if the moon is part of the personality development, has to do with the construction of the multiplicity of the bodies, then the nodes, the nodal axis, is going to colour that story a bit more. So if I was looking at the natal horoscope and looking at the moon, that's going to tell us something pretty general about some of the limitations of the personality and what kind of crystallized automated patterns are inhibiting or obstructing a more pure or direct or potent solar life expression, authentic life expression. The nodes are going to give us a little bit more info on the destiny of the personality development in terms of what points of tension and oppositions of energies, because that's south node and north node and moving from one to the other, what energies need to be reconciled and balanced. And I say balanced, and I know there would be many evolutionary astrologers which would say the same thing. However, I do mention that poignantly or with a bit more of an asterisk because sometimes there is what I see is too general an attitude of south node bad or outdated, north node where you need to go. I have found that actually it is always an indication of energy and forces that need to be balanced. And it's not even necessarily true that someone starts out more south node. I've seen cases where people are more driven into the north node and then there's this sort of, okay, how do I bring this other point back into the picture? So we're going to, the nodal axis is going to color that a little bit more. Now where the moon is, that's also going to be indicating that with its polar opposite. Let's say you have moon in Aquarius, then there's something about the Leo-Aquarius axis that needs to be understood and integrated. So then you have to work, you work at the individual level then, and you tease out what the subjective and really intimate, unique experience of that is. So it's the same thing, but the nodes are going to just color that a little bit more because we think again that they're the eclipse points, so the sun and the moon. It's always about the relationship of spirit and matter, and something is there in terms of needing to bring balance and integration to these energies. So when it comes to the attitude that the North Node is going to reveal something about the soul development of the life, from an esoteric standpoint, I would say not really. It could, because in a more general way, we can say that creating a whole and balanced personality is necessary and fundamentally vital to living a stable and productive soul-centered life. It's an endless journey of the synthesis of the personality, getting it on board with the soul, working out all the kinks, like all the little knots tied in the hose, so to speak. So in that way, any kind of balancing of the form life or aspects of the personality life are supportive to the soul development. But this idea specifically that the North Node equals soul future or soul destiny, that really just falls flat for me. It doesn't feel true in any legitimate metaphysical sense. Now, a little while ago, I re-listened to an episode that Chris did on the astrology podcast with, and I'm blanking on her name right now, but they did an episode on the nodal axis, and they talked about the roots in Indian astrology and all of this, and how it's kind of difficult to tease out exactly what the origins are because so much of Indian astrology was orally passed down and through familial tradition, so we don't necessarily have the same kind of text reliability that we can simply refer to and go, oh yeah, this is where the influence started here. So they go into the history of all that, but something important that this lady says in this episode is that the idea of karma and past lives and future lives or reincarnation, that's an inherent concept that comes with the Indian perspective generally. So the idea that that's localized only to the nodes is actually incorrect. And we would say the same thing from an esoteric ageless wisdom perspective. Everything in the chart is evocative of the karma of the individual. Where the sun is going to indicate what you've accumulated or what you've earned or what you're coming in with from past lives. What the moon is, as we've already discussed, is going to be sort of indicate certain automated patterns of operating which will need to be understood and to be made conscious in terms of how is that limiting the personality life. Squares, trines are going to be gifts or energy flows that we've earned or developed from past lifetimes. The squares are the unresolved tensions and karmic conflicts that need to be overcome. So just in terms of the karmic aspect of the nodal axis and how some of the general pop modern astrology motifs there of south node, past life, north node, future life, because everything in the chart is karmic and potentially dharmic. And certainly if we're talking about dharma as the soul-centered life, then we're looking to the rising sign and then the esoteric rulers of the signs in the chart and all of this, all the different things, and reconfiguring how we look at the trines and squares and where are there the tensions of the lower aspect of the personality. So that is to just bring it back to the nodes, that this idea of it being past life, future life, or soul development, it just doesn't really ring true when we take the whole chart into the picture and into the equation. But that's not to say that the nodal axis isn't important, because just as I was saying before, the nodal axis is going to help color and get a bit more specific in terms of us understanding what are some of the issues in the personality life, what are some of the basic push and pulls of these energies, and how can we come into a more conscious contention with that problem so that we can start to bridge those psychic energies and bring psychic wholeness and balancing. In Carl Jung's chart, depending on the chart that you're using with the house system, in quadrants, he'll be south node in the 8th house, north node in the 2nd house, or in whole signs, it's south in 9th, north in 3rd. So both can work depending on the angle that you're approaching it with. But if we were taking some of the basic, sometimes the automatic ideas of the south and north node for his chart, we would say that he's not lived a successful life because, let's say if we're taking south node in the 8th house, being a psychological investigator or uncovering the depths of the psyche, which would be an 8th house theme, we would say, oh, Carl Jung, you need to not do that. You did that in a past life. You need to be moving towards these 2nd house themes. Of course, that would be a ridiculous sentiment though, wouldn't it? Because we can see that he lived an extremely soulful life and was very much in alignment with a higher purpose and a deep mission, and was a very evolved individual when we take into account the understanding of the soul and where he was likely at in terms of his own soul connection and contact and how embodied that was in his lifetime. If we were playing with it as a 9th and 3rd interplay, we might say that the way that the 9th house shows up in Jung is like he did travel and go to places, did the whole trip to Africa, but certainly an integration of world mythology, the stories of the world. That was the whole, if we move from the psychological depths into the mythology, he always talked about, if you want to understand psychology, you look to the myths. So there's that more of that 9th house flavor there. Again, would we say he needs to not do that as much and go more into the 3rd house themes of like here and there, immediate process? It's so obvious that we can see the interplay of both in his life. And yes, like broader academic publishing versus, and psychism is sometimes attributed to the 3rd house too. So he was kind of doing that with a lot of his work, right? Mediating with the archetypes and writing things down in almost that free flow journal kind of way. But point being that we see the interplay of both there, and that the tension between the nodes is going to, it's certainly true that there is a tension between the two, but we just don't want to be falling into a limited idea about one is the past, one is the future. because from what I have always seen is that it's the tension between both. And we are going to see that across the chart when it comes to the sun sign and the opposite earth sign, the moon sign and the opposite sign, again, with understanding what the moon sign might be indicating. If you've got too much Aquarius and not enough Leo, or you're kind of waxing and waning between the two and bouncing a bit like that in a way that's unstable and mutable. Right, we think about the moon and the waxing and waning phases and the push and pull of the astral body, and this is that fourth ray vibe that we're getting here of moving between these different energies, interplay of different forces. So the North Node and South Node are going to invite for that kind of integration and balancing, and as I said, it's going to help bring a greater more specific picture of the problem of the life from the personality angle. We would consider it from an esoteric perspective, I would say, more so if we've got the nodal axis in an angular house, and most especially if we've got the node, the North and the South Node, aspecting with the ascendant degree or with the esoteric ruler of any of the signs. That's something that there could be some more research into, remembering that the esoteric astrology is still very much in its infancy, so we don't have as much research done from that perspective at this stage, but we're going to be getting more and more. So that's the hypothesis for the moment. And in such an instance, we would just maybe say something about the lessons gained from that nodal axis are going to be directly transferred or utilized by the soul in just more of a concrete way. Let's say if you develop a work skill, there's something about the nodal axis that indicates something like that. Maybe that work skill, if it's the North Node is in a trine to the ascendant, something about that skill might be directly absorbed in a really obvious way into the soul life. That would be my hypothesis for the moment. But as I said, it's still something to kind of tease out and keep an eye out as we understand the esoteric astrology more and live it more and understand what levels of influences we're responding to, because it is always about reception and responsiveness to the more subtle energies, right? Okay, so that's just a bit of a shorter video today about the nodal axis because I am asked about it quite often. So what do you think? Does that make sense? Are we starting to put a few more pieces together in terms of how we can integrate it with an esoteric approach? So in conclusion, while I wouldn't say it's specifically evocative of the soul purpose as we understand that from the esoteric lens, it does help paint the picture of psychic balancing, wholeness, integration of the personality, and that of course is fundamentally vital to creating a stable and soulful life when we factor in the esoteric influences as well.